Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Jasmine Austin, and I am here to welcome you back or to welcome you to the African American Communication and Culture #Scholar Strike Conference. We had a powerful first panel, and now we're ready to head over to our second panel. So our 10 o'clock panel, 10 o'clock Central Standard Time panel, is moderated by Dr. Ron Jackson. And Dr. Ron Jackson is a mentor to me. He's also an American academic, an author. He's a past president of the National Communication Association, and he's a professor of communication, culture, and media. So you're definitely in for a treat. I'm excited about this panel as well. So Dr. Jackson, please unmute and also unmute your video, and we're welcome to have you. And media. So you're definitely in for a treat. I'm excited about this panel as well. So Dr. Jackson, please unmute and also unmute your video, and we're welcome to have you in media. So you're definitely in for a treat. I'm excited about this panel as well. So Dr. Jackson.
Something just happened there.
Hello, everyone. It seems like Dr. Jackson may be having some technical difficulties. So I am going to get our panel started. Okay, so I am going to start with Dr. Amber Johnson. So Dr. Amber Johnson, your time starts now.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. It's disabled at the moment.
Hey, Dr. Johnson. I'm sorry, Jackson, did you get kicked out of the meeting?
Okay, Dr. Johnson, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. All right. So today I'm going to talk about building anti-racist futures, the importance of radical imagination. I'm a professor at St. Louis University in communication and social justice. I'm also the founder of the Justice Fleet and co-founder of the Institute for Healing, Justice, and Equity. So we're going to start with 3 definitions, and these are very simple and very crude on purpose. So 1, racist. Most people, when you think of a racist, you think of a person who discriminates against people because of their race, right? Simple. Anti-racist, a person who fights against racial discrimination. So someone who not only doesn't discriminate against people because of their race, but they're actively trying to stop others from doing it. And then non-racist, a person who neither discriminates against or fights against discrimination, but still might benefit from racism. So basically someone who is inactive. So what do these definitions have in common? Number 1, they fail to address the complexities of racism, right? So racism is so much bigger than how we treat each other. Number 2, they are limited to interpersonal and intrapersonal acts. So by me having a relationship with someone who is a different race than me and treating that person well or kindly or good or with human dignity does not change things bigger than the interpersonal, right? Or me just being kinder to myself, etc. They don't grapple with institutional power. So racism is so pervasive because it is laced within every single institution that has been created in this country, right? It is literally everywhere. And then finally, they don't lead us towards liberation. So again, being nice to someone doesn't change the systems that create racial inequity. Being nice simply doesn't do the trick, right? We can't nice our way out of racism, as my colleague, Dr. Kara Banks, likes to say. So how do we think beyond the interpersonal? How do we think beyond these things in terms of the structural? What does it mean to be anti-racist in the structural sense? So I'm going to use redlining and housing discrimination as an example today. So what is redlining and what happened? In the 1930s, the government created zones. And in these zones, only white people could purchase and own homes. Couple that with the GI Bills that were given to white veterans following World War I and II, right? Many of those veterans were poor, and so they were given money to buy homes. Black families were denied mortgage loans. They were forced to live in apartments and subsidized housing without proper resources. So when you put all those things together, how does it then impact people, right? So what does this mean for white families? It means that you get to own property and build intergenerational wealth. It means you have access to better education because schools are funded based on property values. So if your house is worth a lot, you pay a lot in tax dollars, right? Property tax. That funnels straight into the school system. It means you have a longer lifespan by more than 40 years. So if I go back to this map here, if you look at sort of this part, this is St. Louis City. This is the north side of the city. For people who live in certain zip codes on this side of the city, their lifespan is 55 years old. For people who live down the corridor and out here, their lifespan is over 90. What's the difference? Zip code and race. It also means segregation. So if you don't grow up around Black people, you're more susceptible to believe the lies about Black people that you hear, right? Like Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. It's easier to believe that if you only understand or hear about what Black folks are doing as organizers and activists from the media, right? So it's easy to believe that. So how does this affect Black families? Well, now there's no opportunity to build wealth because intergenerational wealth was built via property ownership back in the day, right? Poor education and lack of resources. So because property values in Black communities are lower, that means less tax dollars being funneled into schools. This also created what we call the modern day ghetto today, right? So huge subsidized housing, a lack of resources in terms of places to eat, hospitals and healthcare facilities, parks and green spaces. You have extreme poverty. So unemployment coupled with a lack of resources coupled with lack of education means that poverty continues, right? That cycle continues. You're also more susceptible to different types of violence, whether that is from police brutality, crime within your neighborhood, because people who live in poverty tend to have to use particular types of survival tactics, right? Just to eat. There's different types of violence. Also, the discursive violence of someone constantly talking about you and at you as if you're not human. And then we've got that shorter lifespan by more than 40 years. So when you think about it in that sense, when you think about racism contributing to and creating a culture of redlining and housing discrimination, right? When you think about it in that big sense, can an interpersonal act of anti-racism fix that? Absolutely not. We cannot fix structural racism through interpersonal acts of kindness, period. So what's the role of imagination then? How do we start having different conversations? Well, one, in order to dismantle structural racism, we have to radically reimagine how we organize, how we engage in activism, how we engage in dialogue, and what it means to create change when it comes to race. We have to think beyond the interpersonal. In order to move forward, we have to reach back. So we talk about reparations often. A lot of people assume reparations just means, give Black people lots of money. But in reality, when you think about what redlining created, it's so much more than just giving Black people money. You're talking about home ownership, access to intergenerational wealth, longer lifespan, right? Money doesn't fix a shortened lifespan. So take a moment to think big, right? What does equal and fair opportunity to housing look like? What does it look like to offer reparations to the descendants of Black families when it comes to housing and wealth generation? What can neighborhoods, communities, and cities do differently right now, right, to erase the harmful consequences of redlining? And how do institutions like credit and credit scores, job insecurity, and unemployment make ownership even harder for Black people right now? So when we think about the role of imagination, how do we talk about racism? So one thing that I want us to do is stop talking about racism as it is connected to a person, right? So Karen is racist because she keeps on doing these things, right? Or this person was racist towards me. How does that diminish the value of these conversations? So yes, we absolutely have to talk about microaggressions. We have to talk about the ways in which racism shows up in our interpersonal lives because it makes living harder, but we cannot stop there, right? We have to broaden our imagination and broaden our conversations to include the structural. So in order to be anti-racist, right, we have to think deeply about these systems. We have to use our own collective imagination to change them. Otherwise, we're just going to be a country full of acts of kindness amidst continued structural and systemic inequity, right? So you can think about it in terms of police brutality, same thing. right? So being nice to each other doesn't fix police brutality, right? Medical discrimination and medical bias, right? Being nice to each other doesn't fix that. So how do we fix these things in ways that change systems and structures? And that's where the imagination comes in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for that wonderful presentation. And we certainly are going to move forward with connecting even further around the issue of anti-racist action. Incidentally, Rachel Griffin is having difficulties with her cell phone connections and with her internet, given a storm where she lives. So she will try to join us if she can, but if not, we will proceed. So we'll move next to LaKresha Graham. And her presentation is entitled Guilt Does No One Any Good, Examining Emotion Through Anti-Racist Education. LaKresha?
All right, good morning, everyone. I also need to screen share, and I don't have access.
Okay, you should be the co-host now.
All right. All right, thank you so much. All right, so this title comes from seeing people or hearing people when things regarding racism, police brutality comes up and they say, I'm not going to feel guilty, to which I say and think, well, no one wants you to feel guilty. Your guilt does no one any good. However, when it comes to doing anti-racist work and addressing racism, privilege, power, there is an emotional aspect. So the question is, what do we do regarding those emotions? One of the challenges when it comes to anti-racist work is challenging racist thoughts, ideas, beliefs, systems, policies, and laws that have existed that are part of our emotions, that are part of who we are. We've all been taught them, and so we need to extricate ourselves from it. In the United States, we tend to value emotional suppression. So if you are logical and rational, then you won't express emotion. So when people do things like express anger or frustration when it comes to racial violence, police brutality, systemic racism, you're seen as illogical. So that means you can't be trusted. However, if you don't have any emotions when it comes to addressing issues regarding racism, then you're not digging deep enough. That means you have a lot more work to do. So some people say, okay, now I feel bad, now what? Okay, so I'm going to talk about three things. You want to identify the emotions, explore your emotions, and create an action plan. If you went to your doctor and you said, and the doctor said, what brings you in? And your response was, I feel bad. Your doctor couldn't do much to help you. Similarly, if you are addressing issues regarding racism and trying to become anti-racist, and you start to feel emotions and you just go, I feel bad, that won't help. What you need to do is identify those emotions. You want to identify if you do feel guilty, if you do feel sad, if you do feel frustrated, if you do feel anger, what are those emotions? Also know that your feelings aren't necessarily fact. Just because you feel as though people might not experience racism, or you feel like, as Dr. Johnson said, you're a nice person and you treat everyone well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are not, or you're being non-racist or anti-racist. Feelings aren't fact. So you want to explore those emotions. Think about what's triggering those emotions. Is it something you see in the news? Is it something you heard someone say? Is it something you saw on social media? What is it about what you saw, read, or heard that makes you feel that way? Many times when we have some sort of emotional reaction to something someone says or does, it goes against some sort of value or belief or worldview. Going to Black Lives Matter, many times people feel frustrated or resentful of that phrase because they were taught that everyone should be treated the same, or colorblindness. So then if you hear Black Lives Matter and you're focusing in on someone's race, it goes against that belief that you have that everyone should be treated the same and you shouldn't think about race. So now what do you do? So you want to explore those emotions, like why do you feel what you feel, and what is it that you already believe that is making you feel that way. So you want to explore those emotions. You want to take some time to reflect. Like, again, going back to feelings aren't fact, reflect on what are the facts and then what are your feelings. Spend some time journaling. That can be an awesome opportunity to think through and write through some of the emotions that you're feeling. Talk with others. I do not, and I highly recommend people go to counseling. Having someone, a professional, help you think through and wrestle with some of your emotions, some of your thoughts can be good. Going to organizations that are doing anti-racist and social justice work. If you are in a college campus, there are tend to be organizations for students and for employees. Community organizations, that can be also a great way. I put an asterisk to say, do not seek out or rely on your Black, Indigenous, or people of color friends, peers, or colleagues to talk through and work through your emotions unless they invite you to do so. It's good to talk with friends, but also don't rely on people who are already dealing with the emotional labor of anti-racist work and live through racism to help you navigate your emotions. And then create an action plan. Many times we just sit in our emotions. We think, oh my goodness, I feel sad or inadequate or frustrated. And I say this personally, like this summer, I was feeling very inadequate, like I wasn't doing enough or doing anything. But then I realized that in my work as a faculty member, in my interactions with, like there are things I can do, structural changes I can make. So think about what organizations that you can join. So do you have a local Black Lives Matter chapter? Do you have a local NAACP? Is there organization at your college or university? Where can you donate money? So this summer, there were lots of organizations that were paying bail for people who were arrested at protests. What's an organization that deals with anti-racist work that you can put your money towards? What community events can you participate in? What educational resources that you can seek out? In this day and age, there are tons of podcasts, YouTube channels, articles that you can seek out to begin to do anti-racist work. And again, you want to think through your emotions as you are seeking out education, because again, if you're doing the deep work to become anti-racist, emotions will come. And how can you influence others around you regarding anti-racist work? So again, how can you address, as Dr. Jackson said, both the systems of racism and other people's hearts and minds regarding racism? What is it I can do based upon the emotions that I have? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graham, and we appreciate your comments. It's so exciting to have these wonderful words where we have individuals who are offering clear, concrete ideas about how we can address anti-racism. Now we move next to two panelists who will be sharing their presentation entitled "Becoming Anti-Racist: Message to a white audience." And these two individuals are Angela Hurd and Runette Diggs. You now have the mic. You're on mute.
It says I can't open it until you have stopped my video.
Okay, I'm sure they'll unmute you here.
Okay, I need to hear somebody. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, is Runette there?
Runette's screen is...
Angela, can you hear?
I can hear you now.
Okay. My relationship, we're talking about a white person's effort in terms of becoming anti-racist and her message to a white audience. My relationship with Angela centered around our sharing of our children's lives while we worked as part-time instructors at a community college. Now, I worked there from 2005 to 2015. and we connected in a communication lab. And our conversations were about our children, how they were growing and evolving. Our conversations never turned to explicit conversations about race until July 7th of this year. Angela.
July 7th, I had been ordained as an elder in my church, and I was invited to speak. And I could speak about anything that I wanted to. And I felt this burden to do something about the Black Lives Matter issue. And I felt like I had this platform. So I texted Runette, and I knew she had a lot of wisdom on the topic, and she had published some things on the topic. And I asked her to help me and to give me some of her insights.
So I will tell you what I texted to Angela, but I want to frame this information by just mentioning Malefia Sante's stratagem called confronting. In an article entitled Identifying Racist Linguistics Acts and Signs, Asante says that we need to be vigilant in managing such communication that's racist or that is negative toward the Black race, because we are those people who create those messages. So we need to be ready to confront. So with Angela's text and with that knowledge and with some of the work I've done, I said, number one, be honest with your perspective. I said, view the attached video, which is in the next text, and asked her if she'd seen the movie Get Out. I said it's a creative tale of how progressives are critiqued sometimes about voting, family talk, and wealth views. Feel free to chat with me after watching. So I sent her a video about white fragility. I sent her a video about race in America from the Holy Post video. And Angela.
So I had did her suggestions. I had read White Fragility. I was too much of a chicken to watch Get Out because I'm afraid of scary movies, but I did read Runette's publication on the movie, which summarized just the parts that I needed to know. And I took her suggestion to be honest in my observations. And I began my presentation by saying, I was born in a racist family. And you could have heard a pin drop in that church. I then went ahead and explained that my family, my parents were in the John Birch Society, which was it was a anti-civil rights organization, and we had meetings in our homes when I was a child. I explained that my parents were supported George Wallace's bid for president, his 2 bids for president, and they worked on his campaign. And I was taught to make the W sign with my fingers when I was greeting people to see if they were Wallace fans as well. And I just laid out how I was working on changing and encouraged the congregation to do so as well. I sent Runette the video or audio clip of the message, and I sent it on to this conference as well. It's been transferred to a YouTube video. And Runette sent me her response.
Well, I told Angela that I was really proud of her courage in talking to the audience. I also asked her if I could share with some of my friends and colleagues about her audio or her presentation. So these are some of the responses I got. Thank you for forwarding this to me. It is a testimonial that took courage to deliver. May God bless and keep her and you. Another person said how incredibly powerful. Please share my appreciation with your friend. Another one said, that was so beautiful. It brought me to tears. It encouraged me to hear her step into her courage and speak her truth publicly. Her affirmation of the role you play in her desire to do better and to urge other Christians to do the same touched me deeply. Now, Angela and I have talked since then, of course, and one of the questions I raised with Angela had to do with her mother. because she explicitly said that her mother used the N-word twice over the weekend. And she didn't say anything, but here's a context for that, Angela.
Yes, my parents are in their 80s, and I was visiting them first time since COVID, and she used the N-word twice, and we were walking, and I didn't say anything, and I was ashamed of that. And I mentioned that in my talk, and I said, because I'm always painted as the liberal of the family, the black sheep, and sometimes I just don't want to get into it, right? And I don't think that they're going to change at this age. But using platforms that I think are useful, right, where I can make a difference. And I was listening to LaKresha's previous presentation about don't sit in that emotion, do something with that emotion. And so I think that this conference is one of those things. And any opportunity that I get will continue to grow and change. And I will also continue to use Runette as a sounding board because she's very wise.
And I want to say that I approach my work with a both and perspective. So my background is interpersonal family communication, but I know that our family talk goes beyond just that particular structure or environment. It goes to communities, it goes to schools, it goes beyond. So Angela and I, through this talk, we'll continue to examine that audio and talk about confronting and being vigilant, because we have to know that this is a life and death situation and that the struggle is real. And it's real for Black bodies. And so part of that confronting would be maybe for her to understand how real is it for a white body.
We had a brief conversation the other day also about from a communication perspective. And there's a lot that white people can do non-verbally and to show support. There's a lot that people can do verbally. And then, of course, there is actions. And of course, people think of protesting as the main action. But forums such as this one, talking with relatives and confronting behaviors is another one. But I also find that, especially being a teacher and having a lot of young students, that so much can be done non-verbally, just to show support, eye contact, smiling, letting them know you're a safe person, you're open to talk, and lots of those different things that we do on campus.
So we'll continue to talk. I'm sure some people might have heard language spoken even today, such as Black sheep, to suggest that even the use of how we use language can translate into, again, demonizing a culture. When Angela and I were talking the other day, she said, I won't air my dirty laundry. And I asked her, do your parents feel that this is dirty laundry?
And I told her, probably not. They don't see that that's a problem. And that's from when you're coming from that worldview, it's a lot to change. And so, you're not going to have that feeling of shame and desire to be different if you don't see it at all. And I think what this whole movement has done and all these conversations have done is move people towards opening their eyes and educating themselves. And seeing it is the first step.
And in talking our conversations as well, I was telling her that while listening to the audio, listening again in our talking, it really hit me. I really haven't been deep inside of a racist home, not deep inside of it. But when you go deep, it's scary, because she told me some of the things that were going on, all the guns that were around. And from her child perspective, her goal was somewhat of resisting anything that seemed scary, because she herself was not afraid of much. Angela, can you speak to that?
Yes, my children asked me how I became so different from my my parents. And I realized that everything that they were involved in was based on fear, fear of differences, fear of someone taking what is yours, protecting yourself. And I am, in general, not a fearful person. And I just didn't buy into that. For instance, if they, said that a part of town might be a scary part of town, that wouldn't scare me. If I was interested in trying different foods and going places and traveling, which they don't do. So I didn't buy into the whole fear narrative, and that helped quite a bit. Now, some of my siblings, I think, did. They're more fearful people, and because when they're starting from a position of fear, that's based on untruths, right? That they have to first address that.
So in continuing to discuss this, I will continue to promote a perspective of being vigilant and confronting this conversation that we're having on this platform, and especially since the murders of George Floyd and others, we know that there's been a tremendous change. In my evolution, there was a tremendous change. So my internal, intrapersonal, and interpersonal became public as I wrote to our president of the college. So it is a time, a very critical time, a time which has always been, as the previous presenter said, of life and death, of gazing on Black bodies dying, of witnessing it. And so we cannot put our heads in the sand on that. And even in our interpersonal relationships, when you see me with a white person, and if I call that person friend, that person is on the road to anti-racist living. It's still maybe evolving, but that's important, that's critical for me to call that person friend.
Thank you. Thank you. In general, and one of the things that I mentioned in my talk was bringing Black friends home to the family farm, which I thought nothing of. And I was very young. And, there was an embarrassing interaction at church once. And now, of course, I would probably, I would have a conversation with that person, let them know what they're stepping into. When you're in it, you don't realize it. And that's, of course, I'm much older now. So that perspective, but having someone else to help you with that perspective, I think those of us who are older, who have our platforms, who can show the young, this is what situation I see. And that's another position that we can do.
And I think it might be pretty loud and might be maybe even somewhat noisy when people hear that we practice Christianity. Okay, so I said I'm a both and. So, and sometimes people wonder, well, how can you be a Christian and African-centered? I say I'm using my voice in that, starting from my doctoral dissertation, I had to seek sources that showed me myself in the white communication literature. So I had to go outside of communication to get that. So in claiming Christianity, spirituality from my lived experience and from my understanding, I've utilized literature such as Black liberation theology to help me know that my belief in Christianity is about looking at the suffering, looking at my life, and that's critical to understanding what salvation is. If the least for those who are suffering are not looked at, if racism isn't looked at, then that Christianity is diluted and weak.
Yeah, and that also is a part of I think a transformation too. A lot of Christians are doing a lot of soul searching because of the way they see the church going, specifically evangelicals right now, and that path does not require that you leave the church or follow the church. It can require that you lead the church in the proper Christ-like direction. And I think that's sort of where I'm at right now. You know, having been allowed to be an elder, I feel like, you know, that's a part, a platform, a position where I can help direct and change. And I look forward to having that opportunity.
Thank you. And as we close, we'll continue to confront and say something, because this begins with you, it begins with us, it begins with family and friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has really been just a wonderful panel. We've enjoyed hearing from all of you. There's lots of individuals that are offering questions for you all to respond to. I just want to start getting to some of the questions so our panelists will have the opportunity to kind of comment a little bit. And the first question actually would go to our last two presenters, Runette Diggs and Angela Hurd. And the question is really about how you communicate to racist family members. The question is, how do you engage with them, and not just family, but also friends? How do you engage with them in a way that is safe and that is geared toward real, progressive change?
Okay, I guess that's to me. I would have to say, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would have to say that among my siblings, we love each other very much, and I know which ones I can be honest with and which ones I cannot. And I've had heart-to-hearts with several of them, and they have been open. There is one or two that I know will probably dissolve the relationship because they're not ready. I continue to, put feelers out there, and they sort of know that I am playing devil's advocate sometimes, but I don't try to call them on everything because I know there's not going to be anything that comes of it. But I think when you're in a relationship with someone, who loves you enough to hear your perspective.
And I'd like to add to that as well, because I heard the word safe. So some of the work that I do has to do with interracial friendship. And so I've been having work over 30 plus years of engaging with a colleague about our relationship and about public conversations, such as when President Barack Obama became president. And we sort of use this public communication as a way to talk about how we saw race. And ultimately it came to a fracture because in talking about this, we realized that there were places that we hadn't navigated about the deeper talk and ways that we saw each other. And so what we've deliberately done is create safe spaces to have these difficult conversations and to confront. For example, I noticed that she wasn't using literature by African Americans or Black people in her syllabus, and I confronted her and she was very taken aback. But this was important because in my evolving and evolution, I can't, like James Holmes said, I can't keep it in. It's a burning fire. So that importance has just become more magnified as I've evolved. And so I share.
All right, thank you for that. Also, there's a question for Dr. Johnson. The question is, can you talk a little bit about the mission of the Justice Fleet and how it works to promote anti-racism?
Sure. So the Justice Fleet, our mission is fostering healing through art, dialogue, and play. And essentially what I'm trying to build is a culture of people who are intentional about healing from systemic injustice as they are fighting against it. Because the fight against, racism and sexism and all of these huge systems it's a lot of labor. It's a lot of emotional, physical, mental labor. And so we have to heal from those labors as we go, not to mention we're also being re-traumatized. So we do a lot of work in community All of our exhibits have interactive parts that inspire healing. So we use paint therapy and art therapy. We use play therapy. And the goal is just to get people to have these serious and hard conversations in spaces that are a little bit more comfortable and easier to digest.
Okay.
If you want to learn more, you can learn more. We have a website, www.thejusticefleet.com.
Okay, thejusticefleet.com. And then, Dr. Graham, the question for you is somewhat of a two-part question, actually. One question is, can you discuss the detriment of white fragility and emotions when trying to engage in anti-racist work? And I'll let you answer that one first, and then I'll go for the next one.
Could you repeat the question again? I couldn't hear the first part.
Sure. The question is, can you discuss the detriment of white fragility and emotions when trying to engage in anti-racist work?
Okay. Again, going back to anti-racist work, it is emotional labor. And one of the challenges is if you have a lower bar as far as being able to discuss and talk about and think about racism, then that can, again, lead people to flee and not want to address it. And so that increases the likelihood that people continue to be racist. So again, that's why it's important that people find ways to acknowledge, identify, address, and find action for their emotions, because everyone's going to have an emotional response if you're digging deep enough. But with white fragility, it's just the deep isn't that deep. It doesn't take as much. So it's important that people, especially if people are feeling as though like they are dealing with either with others or themselves white fragility, that they still work on managing those emotions.
Good. And then the second part is kind of really open to everyone to answer. So I'll just throw it out there. Anyone can respond. The question is, someone's asking, can someone expand on the difference between anti-racism versus not being racist?
I can take that since it was part of my slides. So anti-racism means you are actively fighting against the structures and the relationships that promote racist ideology, that promote racist behavior, and that keep those racist structures in place. Non-racist means that you aren't actively trying to be anti-racist, but you also aren't actively trying to be discriminatory against people from different racial groups. However, not being active is an act of violence, right? So silence is violence. So in reality, non-racist still means racist, but it's just a nicer way to say racist. So not being active is also contributing to racist structures.
Well, as a follow-up to that, I mean, let me just say this, that we have lots of students that are viewing this, lots of individuals that are at the beginning of their journey in terms of thinking about anti-racism. And people that will say, you know, hey, I haven't done anything. Like, how am I racist? I mean, you're calling me racist, but I haven't done anything.
That's why. So if someone is being assaulted on the street and you walk by and you say, oh, look, that person's really getting beat up, and you keep walking, you are complicit in that person's continued violence, period, right? And it's the same thing if you walk and you start filming it, you are complicit in their violence, right? And so until you decide to step up and say, hey, don't do this thing anymore and speak out against it, you're complicit. So, and I also want to point out that being called racist isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. It doesn't mean that you are inherently a bad person. It just means that you are benefiting from an institution that hurts others and that you have a responsibility to push against that institution, right? So it's not saying people who are racist are just bad people. They're people who have been sort of falsely fed information that's not true, and they can use that information to wield violence against other people.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I was thinking too that, you know, some of my relatives live in rural areas, so they don't come into contact with minorities very often. So they don't see anything that they don't see any racism. They don't think they see it, or they don't look for it. And And I always tell them, then read, right? Educate yourself. Travel, get out there, do something. There are things you can do, even if you live in a very rural community that's not very diverse. And that's not an excuse, right?
And
I want to add to that. Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote the book
Being Anti-Racist.
Being an Anti-Racist, said that sort of what Dr. Johnson said, being called a racist isn't the worst thing. But he says that it's not about your heart in terms of this word, racist, but it is about your behavior. And we can, if you are doing and saying things and being a way that reflects being racist, he says you can stop doing those things and do something different, speak differently, and behave differently to show that you're not. So I think getting stuck, some people just want to be stuck. Oh, I'm not a racist. But what are you doing? How are you behaving? How are you thinking and showing that? So it's like the fruit.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
As a follow-up to that, there are individuals that are asking the question, how do we go from interpersonal to the structural? I mean, how do you take advantage of those individuals who are white people wanting to support, that are conscious, that are working towards structural change? How do you do that in a way that doesn't push them away, or I mean, how can we use them? I guess that's the.
So can I answer that as also follow up to what Dr. Hurd was saying? So Dr. Hurd mentioned rural folks, and I think this is a really important place to establish solidarity. Rural white people, especially poor rural white people, deal with the same problems that a lot of poor Black people deal with. But because the language of racism and the language of divisiveness has created these huge gaping holes between Black folks and white folks, we don't see those matchups. So in reality, rural and poor white people and Black people really could benefit from fighting these systems, because both of these systems are impacting both of these groups. And so a lot of times it looks like the hard work of solidarity and trying to understand that our struggles are connected, even though they appear to be pitted against one another. That pitting against the other is actually just the work of the 1%, saying if we can keep our most marginalized groups completely separate, there's less of a chance of them coming together and overthrowing us. And so really we need to start acting in accord. But that means that our white, family got to get their people together, because I can't sit in a room with people who are going to see me as an enemy and treat me wrong because of my skin color while we're all trying to fight the same systems.
And I think in addition to that, Dr. Johnson, adding the words that are descriptive. So Angela said minority. Minority keeps someone like an alien over there somewhere. I don't see that. I just hear that word and I don't see you as a person. So I think we have to start being very conscious also of how we describe who we are talking to, the people, the reality of our lives.
Okay. 2 minutes left. So final 2 comments.
I was just going to add to the question of what can people do. I would also add asking why. Like, why are things the way that they are? Things aren't the way that they are by accident or by happenstance. So if you, let's say, for example, walk across your college campus and you notice that there aren't a lot of people of color as faculty members or as administrators, but there sure are a lot in working in service. Why is that the case? And what can, as an institution, we do something about it? And going back to the being non-racist versus anti-racist, it's also there are people who are fine with being nice to people as long as they don't have power. But like the second that they have power, they're an administrator, they're a professor, they're an employee who has power over someone else, suddenly that becomes the challenge and the issue. I'm okay if people stay where they're supposed to be, but if they come into my neighborhood or interacting with my family, then now that's a problem. And so that gets to the anti-racism. It's not just being okay as long as people stay away from me, which can be non-racist, but it's being like Dr. John said, we're all in this together. Like, we have similar struggles, and if we can help one group, we're helping all of us. Because I mean, going back to Black Lives Matter, if Black lives do matter, that means that impacts everyone. Poor lives, trans lives, LGBTQIA lives, everybody's life. But the second not one life is valued, that means all lives cannot be valued.
Sure.
What's to stop it from impacting everyone?
We are out of time, but we will let Angela Hurd give a final comment.
Oh, really? Okay. I was thinking about, darn, I lost my train of thought. When we're talking about the rural and the inner city folks being in the same social economic status. And that is a place, like Amber said, that is a bridge. That is a bridge that we need to explore because they have more in common than they have differences. Thank you.
Thank you all for such a wonderful panel. Thank you for your thoughts, your comments, your strategies. We appreciate your wonderful activism toward this anti-racist action. We thank you all for joining us as well as individual spectators on Facebook Live and on YouTube. And have a wonderful afternoon. And wait for the next panel. We got one coming on up. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, my second panel members. This was awesome. I am on this side of the screen. I'm going to get... Okay, we are over here, my tech crew and we're over here snapping our fingers. I even sent a private message to some of our speakers just saying, yes, this is awesome, perfect point, good job. So thank you once again for tuning in. I want to elaborate a bit on Dr. Diggs' point, because she mentioned one of the scholars that we actually have a video for on our YouTube channel, okay? So on this YouTube channel, I'm going to have one of my assistants put up a flyer so you can see the videos that we have. Perfect. So if you look at this flyer, it says that we already have recorded videos uploaded to our YouTube channel. And here are 3 of the scholars. So Dr. Diggs mentioned Dr. Asante, and these are just 3 of the many videos we already have posted. So if you're looking for somewhere to go, maybe during the intermission, whenever we have our lunch break at noon, then I highly recommend you go over here to view these wonderful scholars who chose the asynchronous recorded video format. Okay, so we have another panel coming up, our 11 o'clock panel discussing student engagement. So as I get our panel members ready to enter the room, I'm going to put up the slide once again. Thank you for joining this panel, and you are welcome to come back to the next one.